We translate billions of words today, but it actually all began with our very first paying customer who famously only wanted to translate one word.
They're designed to transcribe, translate, and display what the user is saying on the lenses in real time.
Even the languages with only a small percentage of speakers, you're still talking a few million people.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Slater Pod on this beautiful late spring day here in Zurich. Hi, Anna.
Hi, Florian.
So today we're going to have one of the language industry's most influential leaders on the show. Smith Ewell, co-founder and CEO of We Localize, will be joining us shortly. And we'll talk about how he and his team built the company from translating a single word 25 years ago into what is now a global super agency. So stay tuned. We'll keep the news segment quick so you get to hear from Smith shortly. But first, Anna, we're going to talk a bit about Google Translate on stage, RWS remaining publicly listed, and a company called EasySpeak getting some heat from a judge in your home country, Australia.
Yep, that's right.
All right. So just kind of breaking down what Google announced at their developer conference, the I/O conference last week, in terms of Google Translate, quite a lot of stuff that they're now productizing. Among it, they added about 24, no, not about, they added 24 languages to Google Translate. And the kicker is they're using that, what they call zero shot approach to actually doing the translation. Zero shot meaning no data or very little data, I guess, which is, quite impressive. I mean, if no data and you do the translation, impressed. So some of these languages, I got to admit, how many did you know, like in percentage, if you just read through the list?
I would say 30, 40%. There's definitely a lot there that I'm not familiar with.
Same. I didn't know Dogri, Ewe, Dihevi. I mean, some of them are really niche, like Dihevi is apparently spoken by 300,000 people in the Maldives. But then others are just kind of betray my ignorance, like Bhojpuri, I guess, is used by 50 million people in northern India, Nepal, and Fiji.
Yeah, they're really starting to cover India now, which is great. But yeah, even the languages with only a small percentage of speakers, you're still talking like a few million people.
Absolutely, in India, right? And so, and then in Africa, they have languages like Luganda, apparently spoken by 20 million people in Uganda and Rwanda. So, wow. And one of the languages that is going to be super useful in Switzerland is Tingria, which is spoken by about 8 million people in Eritrea and Ethiopia. We have a lot of recent immigration from Eritrea that are Tingria speakers. So I know there's been the Swiss authorities had a really hard time recruiting interpreters for this language. So, I'm not saying, of course, use Google Translate as the equivalent of a trained professional interpreter, but generally just for interaction, this could be quite useful to people. So again, the zero shot machine translation approach is something they only very recently wrote about in a research paper. I think we said it was January 2022 when they said they're using these kind of massively multilingual MT to translate more than 200 languages. And lo and behold, a few months later, it's already what they call in production, right? So they're using it on Google Translate, which obviously is online and for use by everyone. Now, there was a bit of a problem during the launch. So what happened? Can you just give us the 30-second rundown?
Yeah, there was what looked like a language issue. So during the presentation at the conference, CEO Sundar Pichai was standing in front of a backdrop, and the backdrop was meant to display names of languages available in Google Translate. But as many commentators pointed out, a lot of the language names were riddled with errors. So, for example, the Arabic letters were backwards and not connecting. And there were some comments also on the Swiss German.
I read it. I was like, they spelled it like we type it in dialect. So it's not like there's no official spelling because there's like no official way to write Swiss German. But I was so surprised. I look at this, I look at the Google CEO, and then in the backdrop, I see like my little dialect spelled out in like my local Zurich variant. I'm like, all right. So apparently the Google people, some of the Google Translate people are based here in Zurich. They have about 4,000 people, maybe even more by now in kind of their Zurich presence here. So somebody added Schweizerdeutsch to the backdrop there for the Google CEO. Now, then, of course, I went and thought maybe they added Schweizerdeutsch to Google Translate. They didn't. So it looks like not all of the languages they had on this backdrop are actually part of the launch, or very few.
Basically, most of the non-Latin or non-Cyrillic based scripts had one or more issues.
I hope they're kind to that marketing person that was responsible for that backdrop.
It looks like it was more of a printing error or rather than a language error. So it looks like it was a problem with the conversion either into PDF or printing. There might have been a font mapping error. So anyone in the language industry is familiar with this problem, and quality check would have been good.
You did all the hard work, and then the DTP gets you. So yeah, you just launched 24 new languages based on super advanced AI technology, but the DTP gets you. That gets you the press. They also they unveil. I only saw that later, by the way. Those glasses. So the glasses that they had this Google Glass thing like 5 years ago. Didn't really take off. Apparently, they're relaunching some glasses. I don't know what they're called. Probably Pixel something. And they're designed to transcribe, translate, and display what the user is saying on the lenses in real time. So there's like a nice little YouTube video. Go check it out. Can be useful. Seems quite useful that you have like the subtitles on your glasses.
Looks like it's still in the fairly early stages. It looked more like a teaser than really presenting the product. So the video of the prototype, for example, presents a simulated view of the experience of using the glasses rather than showing the glasses themselves, or showing directly how they will work. But yeah, definitely very interesting advance.
Why do you show us a simulated version? I want the real thing. Okay, so that's Google. Moving on to RWS, whose shares have gone up or went up a month ago, kind of, stayed relatively elevated and then dropped again by like 18%. Why? Because there was this talk about a Asian-based, like a Hong Kong-based private equity firm called Baring that was rumored to be interested in buying RWS, right? Delisting it from the stock market. There was this 1 month period where they would have had to indicate that they're actually going to proceed with an official bid. And Baring now said in a statement that they do not intend to make an offer for RWS. And then, a couple minutes later, a response from RWS acknowledged that Baring is no longer evaluating a possible offer for the company. So that's it. So shares went up, traded flat, and now we're down again where they started a month ago. I think they're slightly higher. So anyway, good. RWS remains publicly listed. We get to dig into their filings, and not bad for us. Then the CEO, Ian El Mokadem, he kind of reiterated the goals that they set at the Capital Markets Day. They said the pillars of their strategy include accelerating organic growth, which currently I think is somewhere in like the single digits. Simplifying the tech portfolio, that'll be interesting. So simplifying usually means merging, selling, doing other things. Driving operational leverage, which is kind of a technical term, to expand margin. And they commit to investors to enhance growth and returns. All right. I'm okay with that. Thank you, RWS, for now remaining independent and, remaining listed on the stock market and giving us all this beautiful information. So let's go to Australia. So EasySpeak, there was a ruling in Australia. Tell us more about that.
EasySpeak, language service provider in Melbourne, Australia. They specialize in interpreting. They're the incumbent provider of telephone interpreting to the New Zealand government. And there was a ruling by a Supreme Court judge in Victoria calling the sale of EasySpeak, which occurred in September, a brazen and audacious example of phoenixing. So phoenixing is when a business shuts down to avoid debt and then reopens under another name to resume operations as if nothing had happened. So EasySpeak was originally owned by Intellicom, They sold EasySpeak to a third-party technology, Fluenty, in September 2021 before going into liquidation. So this is the activity that the judge has ruled was an example of phoenixing, and the judge voided the sale.
Phoenixing, when a business shuts down to avoid debt and then reopens under another name. So, all right. Well, so you basically just, you avoid your debt, your obligations, you reopen and you begin trading. Phoenixing, a nice term. Never heard that term.
New or updated legislation in Australia as of 2020 to identify this type of activity. The main factor is the sale price. The main factor that they'll look at is to determine whether it is illegal or not. So, for example, EasySpeak was valued in February 2021 at 11.27 million Australian dollars, so about 8 million US dollars. And then by June, its valuation had gone down to between 100,000 and 700,000 Australian dollars, and then it was eventually sold for 58,000 Australian dollars. So those are the data points that the judge was looking at when making the ruling. So basically, so if the new company obtained assets at what they call mates rates, then the sale is considered illegal Phoenix activity.
Did they use that term, mates rates?
I don't know if that's what the judge said. But unofficially, mates rates.
Mates rates. All right. Doesn't sound good.
Slater spoke to EasySpeak to get comment. So they responded and said that the court is yet to make a final enforceable order to give effect to the judgment. They themselves described the EasySpeak business as commercially sustainable, and they cited the fact that they'd had an independent audit by BDO recently. And they said that they're considering the court's decision and deciding whether to appeal, and also deciding whether to seek a stay or suspension so they can continue business as usual in the meantime.
Oh, well, all that legal stuff, they could have avoided a lot of that. Anyway, not a great story. Hopefully no kind of linguists were caught up with like bad debts. So we'll follow. I mean, if it reaches that level of court, then usually those cases are covered by the press. So we'll let you know if there's an update. Now we'll head over to Smith and talk about WeLocalize. And welcome back, everyone, to Slater Pod. Really happy to have Smith Ewell join us today. Smith is the co-founder and CEO of WeLocalize, one of the 5 super agencies. So, hi, Smith. Where does this podcast find you today?
Hi, Florian, and hi, everybody. I am in New York City. This is my first day back to an office.
Looks good. For the video, those who watch it on YouTube, you see a bit of New York in the background there. So, nice.
We're back. It feels good.
Before we get started on Shop Talk, just tell us a bit more about your professional background and how you got into the language industry. Coming from the military, right? You were an artillery officer in the U.S. Army, I read, for 4 years. So how did that happen, going from the Army to language services?
Well, it sounds like an odd start, so I'll try to explain it. There were 2 big things that got me in the industry. First was living in Germany, and the second was meeting my wife. So the first, I was stationed in Germany in the military, and being in Germany when the Gulf War started, I thought, well, because the Cold War was still happening. This was before the Berlin Wall fell. And I thought, well, they'll leave us in Germany, and the troops that go to the Gulf War will come from the States. But in a very unusual move, my unit got pulled from Germany and got attached to the unit that led the main attack in the Gulf War. So I was there for 6 months. Fortunately, it was successful. And the very first weekend I got back, the second reason I'm in this industry is I met my wife, Julia. We met in an Irish pub in Frankfurt, Germany, and famously, we had no common language.
Then transition us to, okay, well, I'll start a translation company or localization company, or how did that go?
Yeah. Well, the first part, as I said, living in Germany, uh, most Americans actually never travel outside the country. So I was very fortunate to be able to do that and got to live in Germany. And it was only when I was on the outside looking back that it really brings home the point that the whole world doesn't speak English. Prior to that experience, I- and I think that maybe a lot of Americans assume that, well, doesn't 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 most of the world speak English? But as we know, that's not the case. And so the idea sort of started to germinate from that. And then when I met Julia, it really took off because we were experiencing firsthand. Uh, we couldn't talk. So the need to communicate and the growth of the internet, after all, it's called the World Wide Web. So we figured people are going to need to be able to communicate in all sorts of different foreign languages on the World Wide Web, and off we went.
Off you went. So then you moved back to, I guess, to the US, and you started the company from there, not in Germany, or was there an original uh, seed sown in Germany?
We moved back to the US, which was another interesting milestone because Julia did not want to leave Europe. She's very much a European. And fortunately, she did. We got married just 1 year later after we met. And then we started to work on this idea of helping companies go global. And this is another fun story. We translate billions of words today, uh, but it actually all began with our very first paying customer who famously only wanted to translate one word.
Tell me more about that. That's a nice anecdote.
You can't make this up. It really, it, believe it or not, that's exactly the way it happened. The first paying customer, they wanted to translate. They called and they said, "Well, we want to we're selling our product globally, and the name of the product, we want to translate it." And so we were kind of confused, but we said, "Okay." And the name of the product was Pathfinder. So it felt like the skies had parted, and here it was. We're trying to find our way. Very beginnings of the company, and the first customer wants to translate the word Pathfinder, and we did. And our path from then on went into this direction of localization, and now that's morphed again. So it all began with one word.
Pathfinder is an interesting one. I could go on a linguistic thing, but if you word for word translate it into German, it would mean like something like Boy Scout or Girl Scout. Just the two words. Anyway,
It was a it was an oil refinery drilling product. So you drop it into wells, and it helps the exploration for oil. That's what the product was.
okay. That's. I hope you charged more than 15 cents for the translation.
Well, that was the challenge. What were we going to charge them? Because call it 20 cents a word. I don't know, a dollar a language.
Let's fast forward. Let's fast forward. A lot of the listeners probably know we localize, probably most of them, of course, but still, like, where you at from Pathfinder to now? You mentioned like billions of words. So, like, where are you now? You actually have a kind of a global marketing arm now as well that would probably be happy to do the Pathfinder project for a good consulting fee. But take us forward 25 years. Like, what are the key services now? Kind of geographic footprint, leadership team, just for people to understand the scale and the size of We Localize today.
Well, we've been just super fortunate to keep on growing from the very beginning. Just two of us to well over 2,000 employees today, all over the world, in Asia, Europe, America. We last year did about 300 million in revenue. We're on our third private equity investor, which is also pretty rare, but that's really worked out well for us. Our leadership teams all over the world. We were distributed even before the pandemic. So we're used to that. And we're incredibly proud of the team and where we are today. It's come so far from that first word.
Now let's do the path here. So you've seen a lot of waves of technology, of kind of major clients, of like from I don't know translating, localizing Windows to now everything on SaaS to all these regulated becoming much more important. Like, what have been some of the kind of key milestones and challenges for you over the past quarter century? Top three, four, five that you felt were kind of transformative for you in the business.
Well, there's definitely a wave that coincided with the dot-com wave. I remember eTranslate back in the day, and eTranslate raised a bunch of money, and the whole idea was that you could do it all automatically on the internet, get anything translated, and it was all just going to happen magically. That didn't quite work out. TMS's translation management systems also took off. You had Uniscape, you had Global Site, you had Idiom, and they were all getting off the ground. Those didn't work out that well either. So that wave was very experimental. And then compare that to now, where those technologies have really matured, and there's lots of great companies in that space. Curiously, I don't see any of them in the rankings. So I don't know if it's these technology companies don't want to report their revenue or what's going on, but it is interesting to see 25 years later, because as you know, this is our 25th anniversary, which we're really proud of the company. I have never seen a tech-only company in any top 10 ranking. So that's curious.
That is interesting. I mean, it's probably high margin, but harder to scale, and fully automating the process, as we all know, is just super hard. I mean, you're working in all these super complex industries like life sciences, med tech, software and tech, global marketing. It's very complex. And it's very complex to manage. I mean, for you to wrap your head around all of these different client segments, how do you do that? Like, how do you understand all these different pain points from the clients? I remember that back from my LSP days, like understanding what a life sciences company does, and then you turn around and you talk to an investment banker about translation of a pitch book is kind of mentally taxing. So, but you got to manage this at scale. Tell me a bit more about that.
Well, the first phase, as I was describing, was very experimental, and we were experimenting as well, and we failed. So right out of the gate, we brought our first investor in 2000, the summer of 2000. And the whole premise was we were going to ramp up the company and also automate and build out a global sales team. And we went out and spent a bunch of money that we raised from our first private equity investor. And then everything changed overnight. In the beginning of 2001, the internet bubble burst. Our biggest client went bankrupt, and we had to cut 2/3 of the company. So right out of the gate, unfortunately, we had our first big failure, and we had to recover from that. From there, we fortunately did. We made some really tough decisions earlier. Those were the toughest things I've ever had to do. Because at the beginning of a startup, you hire a lot of your friends. And we had to make some of those tough choices. The second phase was really starting to see that experimentation mature around automation. Because my first big client after the Pathfinder client was Cisco, and they had a product, 6 languages, and the only reason we won it was because we were using Trados. And we met a little company in Germany that had created all these innovative macros to process files. This was back when you would get the source Visual Basic files, get a whole lot of the source code back then, which you don't do today. So that maturation phase was around technologies with translation memory leading the way. Those were early days of the adoption of that technology. Not many translators were even using it. So that helped us differentiate at the beginning, right, with Cisco. And they're still one of our top clients 25 years later. And other technologies started to come on to play. But the challenge was there was no interoperability. So we were one of the first companies with a number of others. We formed this initiative called Interoperability Now. And we were starting to work closely to try to get exchange between different systems, because We Localize took the view, which is sort of novel at the time, we weren't going to create a walled garden around technology. We wanted to open it up. We wanted to be able to offer it a customer to use any technology they wanted, and we would build around multiple products. So that's what that second phase was really all about, seeing the technologies actually mature in their capability, and then learning how to collaborate, create connectors, use standards to create connectors. And we led a number of those initiatives.
So you mentioned that the walled garden, like avoiding that, right? And kind of running more of a, I don't know, best of breed for language tech. So but you have a quite a strong internal piece of kind of ERP, like a core that you're building around, and you're adding these additional systems to it. Can you tell us a bit more about that? Like how you created that core, and then that open approach? Because there's this discussion in industry, of course, like, do you just want to own everything, or do you want to kind of, again, like depending on the customer's needs, deploy? That would be an interesting discussion.
We had a fun debate many years ago. It was at a TAOS conference, and myself and the CTO, Chief Technology Officer, SDL at the time, we got up on stage and debated the walled garden approach, because SDL at the time was very much proprietary products, and even getting the APIs was difficult. We took a different view, and have stuck to that view ever since. We very much want to create technologies that can, from prospecting with a customer, in our case, that's Salesforce, all the way through to invoicing and collecting from a customer, fully digitized. But the only way to do that is through I believe, through an open environment where you're connecting best of breed products. So that whole initiative in the beginning, which we helped lead, called Interoperability Now, was about connectors. So our system, Pantheon, to give you some perspective today, has over 200 connectors to client systems, to our competitor systems, to third-party systems, such as Microsoft products, Workday, and that's how that ecosystem has evolved, that open garden. That's been the approach we took.
When you think about these, what the industry still calls CAT tools, I was trying to steer everybody away for the past few years to calling them like translation productivity tool. Totally failed. Everybody still writes CAT tools, but let's assume CAT tools, TMSs, etc. When you think about those tools and connecting them, like, isn't it super hard to maintain a dozen different technologies, also from a workflow perspective, a billing perspective, quoting perspective, and then maintaining them among like a large distributed linguist space that you have?
It is super hard. You're correct, and a whole lot of work and investment has to go into those connectors. Is there a way around it? I used to think we could probably get there if we could get the industry as a whole to adopt certain specific standards to make that much easier. That was harder than we thought. Getting a whole lot of competitive companies to agree just wasn't entirely possible. So it didn't really happen. What does that leave us today? There's no way around, from a translator all the way through, but it's not just translators, anyone working on a task, because actually only about half of the We Localize tasks we do today are translation. That's interesting how that's evolved also. But everyone wants their own work surface. everyone's comfortable with where they're most productive. So we've got to try to enable that experience so it's easy for them to do the work. That's the approach we've taken.
Yeah, and I think a company of your size is probably less. It's less of a challenge than if you're like a $30 million company because you can deploy resources they can't, right? So they're just if you're smaller, you probably struggle a lot with that complexity. Um, you mentioned that only half of the tasks now are translation tasks. So what's the other half? Is it around your AI training data services, for example, or what? And tell us a bit more about that, and maybe what are some of the other lines of business that you're in?
The interesting thing is we started in localization. That's about a little bit more than a third of our business. So that means 10 years ago, we weren't even in 2/3 of our revenue. That's how things have evolved. It's incredible. And as I said, maybe half our tasks are translation oriented today. So what are they? Well, we're trying to create the ability for a customer on their global journey to have a guide, uh, a trusted partner, almost a travel agent, for lack of a better word. You're going to a new country, you don't speak the language, you don't know where to go. So for us, that begins with legal, protecting your product. From there, marketing your product. So we bought 2 digital marketing agencies over the years. Of course, we've got core localization across all the different content types to support our customers. And then we ran it out with the data. And I think that's the most exciting thing for our industry today. So if you believe that communication and effective communication is it's at the heart of all human interaction, whether it's personal, whether it's in business, if that's not understood, relationships break up, uh, business relationships as well. So where does our industry sit? If that's core, at the core to that is the data, because it's all digitized now. In the beginning, we even took faxes. It was all analog. Now it's all digital, which means all of that natural language processing data, words in a data form, our industry sitting on the treasure trove of that data, and how we can use that to make communication better around the world is the ability to change the world. So it's a really exciting place for our industry to be right now.
You mentioned NLP. We're seeing a lot of NLP, I guess, for lack of a better term, news over the past couple of months, and we're trying to parse them here with our team at Slater. All these large language models that are open source by companies like Facebook, Meta, and Google, etc. And then there's this kind of ecosystem of startups that are building all kinds of additional solutions on top of these powerful models. How do you see this fitting into the kind of more traditional language industry? Do you think we understand where this is going? Do you think there's another wave coming that we need to catch or miss? And just generally, where do you see this kind of powerful language AI going, and how it's affecting the language industry, but also, of course, we localize.
We're in the wave already, I would argue, and we're trying to ride that wave. Things are changing. They're changing so quickly, and of course, the wave could crash, and you could be caught up in it. And we've had those kinds of experiences because we try to stay on the edge of the wave. So NLP is a big part of that. You were talking about if we could change an industry acronym, let's change CAT tool. I'll throw out another idea. Let's change LSP, language service provider, and let's call it NLP, natural language provider, because that's what we've become. So in that context, the ability to use linguistic data. Let's take, for example, the convergence between product localization and product marketing. When I first got in the industry, we were talking to all our customers were product people. We never got a meeting with marketing. And because those are separate areas in the companies, they weren't really even communicating. But now those have converged. So when we see product localization and product marketing converging, then you can take, again, this language data, which our industry is fortunate to be sitting on, and you can use it to help identify what's more effective in SEO, as an example. Is it short form language? Is it long form? Is it formal? Is it informal? What kind of reading level is it? And you can actually use your performance data, your Google Analytics or whatever products you might be using, and you can link it to experiments through algorithms with the linguistic data itself. So strategically, what we always wished for in the very beginning, 25 years ago, can we be a deep partner for a customer, not just a project provider? My first big deal with Cisco was a project, but become a true partner. Well, now we're there.
How do you stay I don't know, maybe cynical is the wrong word, but like if you've been in the industry for 25 years, you've seen these hype cycles, like, how do you avoid just thinking, well, this is just another thing that's going to pass, and kind of do the risk assessment that, well, we should be on top of this, but we should probably not bet the farm on it. I don't know. It's hard to put that question into words, but like, how do you stay balanced between making sure you're not missing out, but also not just going into the completely wrong direction? Because there's just so much happening and people have to prioritize, right?
I never believed the hype that MT was going to change the world and put us out of business. I never bought into that hype. We're on our third private equity investor, and each time we met a potential new investor, that was the first question: Is MT going to put you out of business? No. So back to your earlier point around renaming cat tools, it's another productivity tool. So in that case, I think you're correct. That hype just never came to fruition. And I think it's very important NLP technology. It's just another NLP technology, and it's very effective. And we've got significant usage of it ourselves. But is it going to radically change the industry? I think there's other things that will change it even more profoundly. NLP across the board, rather than just that single NLP technology. What is it? What do I mean there? That's using, because MT is training engines. That's using the data to not just train a machine translation engine, but all kinds of predictive capabilities. So you can understand, for example, where's the risk in quality? Quality historically has been, I would argue, very wasteful because it's just random sampling. The algorithms should be able to tell us where exactly is the risk. And you can use the data, and that can help point to where might the risk be in quality, where might the risk be in OTD. So is that hype? Definitely not, because that is mission critical to a company's business.
You mentioned private equity, and you also said that you're on your third private equity investor. Why do you think the role of private equity is so strong in the language industry? I mean, I'm obviously not an expert on many other industries, but in this one, it's like 1/3 or maybe half of like the top 100 providers are owned by private equity. Why is that? What do they like about this industry, and why are they so active?
You're right. I saw in your reporting that it looks like about 1/3 of the top 100 ranked by revenue are private equity backed in our industry now. And it's fun for me to see how far that's come. We were one of the first private equity backed companies in the industry back in 2000. And I asked our investors, actually, we had a board meeting last week, and I gave them that bit of information. And I said, the other companies where you invest, are there industries, do they have so much private equity like this one? And they said no. So you're right. Good question. Why is it? I think it's got a few of the basics that all private equities like to see, private equity companies like to see. First of all, is it a growing industry with a bright future? Yes, and it just keeps on growing. So great, we check that block. What happens when there's a problem? In other words, how resilient is the industry to downturns? So in the '08 financial crisis, when everything collapsed around the world, how did we do? We were flat, so we didn't decline. In COVID, everything collapsed around the world again. How did we do? We were flat again. So through both of the biggest challenges in the last 20 years, our company, and I think many others, the industry as a whole, weathered the storm. So great, you're growing, great. If things go bad, you're in good shape. Next area is technology. Can we automate? Can we invest to help improve not just growth but profitability as well? Absolutely. And then finally, is it an industry where we can consolidate? Private equity companies are very attracted to buy and build. And WeLocalize has acquired 19 companies over the years in that context. That opportunity is still as big as it ever was. Yes, there's been a lot of consolidation, but there's still an enormous amount of fragmentation, and you'll see that consolidation continue, and we want to be one of those consolidation leaders.
There's new companies showing up on our radar, frankly. Like, if you take the ecosystem 7 years ago when we started with Slater, yes, a lot of them have been acquired in the meantime, but there's just so much activity and so many small companies kind of rising to a certain level and so many startups getting to a certain level. So it kind of there's these two forces, right? The consolidation coming through M&A, but then there's just the refragmentation by new companies getting started. So it's yeah, I think it's keeping us on our toes. Yeah, it is fascinating how active private equity is and how many are looking into the space. I mean, I think generally there's just a lot of private equity. I mean, that industry itself has experienced a lot of growth, but yeah, 1/3 of probably the entire industry owned by private equity is probably quite unusual.
I could tell you our investors said it was. So we're fortunate. We really are. We couldn't be more fortunate to be in such a great industry. And it's an industry we love. We love what we're doing. We love the people we're working with. Uh, so it's just a fantastic spot to be in.
You did mention M&A. I mean, what you said, what, 19, you're at 19 acquisitions now?
That's right.
So what's the playbook? Like, how do you scout for deals? When do you, I don't know, pounce? When do you buy something? What do you do after? Like, is there a kind of an integration playbook? What are the typical challenges having gone through this 19 times?
If I could sum up the challenge in one word, it's trust. Building trust is the challenge. If you're able to do that, you get through the ups and the downs, of which there are many, because anytime you're integrating, it's the same as being in a relationship. You're a personal relationship. You've got to compromise, and those compromises are tough, especially if you've been doing it the same way for so many years, and all of a sudden that way has to change on either side. And having the humility to be willing to do that, which comes because you trust each other, you trust in the relationship. That's what we're trying to do. That's the brand I want WeLocalize to stand for, the most trusted brand in the industry, whether it be through with clients, with vendors, with staff, with acquisition targets. So what's the playbook? We come in and we try to build that. And what I tell everybody when I first meet them after we acquire a company is, you don't know me. I'm not expecting you're going to trust me today, tomorrow, but if you're patient, if you're willing to give us a chance, then I pledge we'll earn that. We'll do our best and we're going to earn it. And more than half of our leadership team worldwide all came through acquisitions, including half our C team. So we've proved it's possible. Still here.
Still here. You mentioned brand. You typically rebrand, right? You don't like you rebrand them into We Localize, or did you keep a couple of brands on their own?
We have kept a couple on their own. We've got a brand for legal, Park IP, and we have a brand for digital, Adapt Worldwide.
What's driving the branding versus like rebranding versus not rebranding? Is there a particular logic behind it? Because if the brand's like super strong with a particular client segment, or
That's it right there. We don't want to confuse customers. And when we bought Park IP here in New York, that's where I am today, and in that office, it was a very strong brand. Park and RWS were two brand leaders in the IP space at the time, and we didn't want to confuse anybody. So we kept it, and off we went.
this is one of the more challenging um, parts of the language industry, understand the whole IP space. I'm not sure how familiar you are with it in the details. I mean, there's been this big change on the regulatory front in Europe, and that's later. We're trying to keep up to date, but this is a really difficult one. Like others are easier to understand than IP services. How is that for you? Buying that company, acquiring these capabilities, like and kind of understanding it as a larger company, and then using the resources of a larger company to get ahead in that very complicated space.
I didn't understand it at all. I could remember because RWS was public. You could go learn whatever you wanted. And I'd heard about RWS, I'd heard about patent translation, and it was just interesting to see this 100 million company doing really well as a public company, and started to get curious about that business because they were really the only game in town in that space at the time. So did some research. Our customers were asking about it, and that's kind of guided us from the very beginning. That we started as a traditional localization company and have evolved into much more than that because customers asked us about it. So we investigated it, looked into it, found a great company, Park. We were fortunately able to acquire them. I think RWS took notice on that one because they turned around not long after and said, "Okay, we're going to get into localization." So we jumped into Park. They jumped into Moravia. So that was an interesting tit for tat, and kept on evolving since then.
Absolutely. So now we're a little bit in more, I guess, uncertain times than maybe even just 5, 6 months ago with, war in Europe and the rising interest rates and just generally a bit more uncertainty macro wise. Um, but like, what are some of the initiatives and project you have now for 2022, maybe next year? What are you working on, and how does this maybe additional uncertainty kind of influence decision making or not?
Or definitely influences what's going on with the war in Ukraine and inflation around the world are changing everything. This is a business cycle inflation, which I've never had to encounter or work with. Uh, the last big inflation cycle was in the 70s, so before we ever got into business. So this is new territory. How do we navigate through it, especially with the great resignation going on, uh, incredible pressure on wages? We've got to continue to create these relationships with people. So how do we do that? We have two people goals, and that applies to all people: staff, vendors, clients. Those two goals are: first, prove we care, demonstrably care, can prove it. And the second is answer the question, where can I go from here? Get a lot of talented people, they could work anywhere. And what reason can we give them to want to work here? Is because in terms of where they can go, it's the best place to be. We've got 3 OKRs in the company: objectives and key results. They are be the greatest growth opportunity, again, for everybody involved, investors, staff, customers, how customers grow. Be the easiest to work with. You mentioned the complexity and the different technologies. We're not there yet. Many of the things we're doing today are still not easy. So we've still got some ground to cover there. And then finally, be the greatest company. Be the greatest company in the industry, not necessarily by revenue, but by reputation. That's what we're shooting for. And I think that's how we navigate through these challenges. People want a safe harbor when times are tough. I've been there. I was in the Gulf War, and I can tell you that back to our brand of trust, when the bullets are flying and you're in a foxhole, who do you want covering your back? And who are you going to trust to do that? That's stuck with me ever since. And that's how we get through this kind of challenge. And you don't have it with everybody, but we work really hard to try to get it with as many as possible.
Always ask, close at the podcast with a bit of crystal ball gazing. So next 2 to 3 years, let's assume we get through that challenging period. Where do you see the language industry in 2 to 3, or pick your time frame, 5 years? How have we evolved? Will it be very similar to what we do now, or are we kind of at the cusp of something big and new happening?
We're definitely on the wave. We're definitely riding that wave. Big, new, exciting things happening. I don't think that's hype, because what we'd always wanted in terms of the ability to automate and do exciting innovation through that, we're not the only ones. There's lots of interesting innovation happening, especially around NLP, and that's going to change the way we communicate with chatbots, with digital assistants, with appliances, with our automobile, with all of these things that we use in our daily lives. There's only two choices of an interface. You're either speaking to something or you're typing something into something. That's all you've got. In both of those, language is at the heart. And NLP technology, which is capturing whatever you say or whatever you speak into the device, is going to change the experience. And companies that really appreciate that and the importance of culture and respecting culture through localization and different quality levels of language depending on the need, which could go from, of course, raw MT all the way to gotta be exactly right. Be able to do that at any point in time on any device in ever smaller increments. For us, the average translation task for us is less than 200 words. And for our biggest customer, there's 60,000 of those tasks that go through the pipeline every month. So this is kind of change that's happening. And our industry's at the center of it. So I find that to be really exciting.
200 words is better than 1 word. So maybe we'll get to the 1 word increment at some point in time.
Maybe. You're right. Go full circle.
Go full circle. All right, Smith, this was fantastic. Thanks so much for taking the time today to join us.
Appreciate it, Florian. Thank you.